I've got mine.
So, you have?
Yeah.
You
I have
You have?
Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
We are behind her, so must be.
Don't anyhow.
No, anyhow.
Good evening, friends. Good evening, all of you who are looking at this event from outside here, online. Wherever you are, a very warm welcome to all of you. This is the first event of Function 8 ever since COVID set in. We have been sleeping for the past 2 years. Now, today's event, we have many people to thank. And here I will start with Jeanette Chong Aridos, who offered to organize this book launch and to moderate the book discussion afterwards. Then I also have to thank all the speakers here who, despite their very heavy schedule, have made time to come here. And here from my right, Kristen Han, Dr. Chi Soon Juan, Alfian Saad, and Lin Kei Siu. I have also to thank Terry for the use of this wonderful space and for live streaming this event to all of you who are living in all parts of the world. I have also to thank all the writers, contributors, and the researchers for the book. And finally, but not least, I have to thank Transformative Justice Collective for helping us with logistics and publicity. You may wonder, what is Function 8? Well, Function 8 is a social enterprise. It was incorporated in the year 2010 by a group of friends who were messing around in civil society in the 1980s. Our objective is to share social, political, and economic experiences and ideas with people who are interested. In the past 11 years, Function 8 have held forums, talks, workshops, human rights film festival, and of course, the publication of books. If you are interested to read Function 8 books, we have a list at the back of this new publication, which is titled Ridiculous, Untold Tales of Singapore. You may wonder how we came about this title, or this book, in the first place. Actually, this book came about by accident. It was at a meeting of Function 8 and that time, there were many young people who had gotten themselves into trouble, being called to the police station, served with Hoffman notices, charged in court, sued for defamation, and went to jail. And someone said, it's all so ridiculous. And then another person said, well, Ridiculous is a very good title for a book. Why don't we publish a book with the name Ridiculous? Now, as usual, Function 8 comprised of members who are not very young, and so things move rather slowly. And then one day, Jordan Wem was sentenced to 22 weeks, days, not weeks, 22 days in prison. And we were really caught up, and some of us thought, honestly, this is really ridiculous, and we really have to proceed with the publication of a book by this name. And so, you see, we have this book today. Ridiculous is a book with two parts. The first part comprised of essays by young activists and old activists, and they share their experiences with all of you. If you will read the book, they are very interesting stories. We felt that it is important to document the work of activists today. And so we collected a number of essays, and this formed part one of the book. The second part of the book comprised of a summary of incidents that took place from 1970 to October 2021. These are mere summaries. They are very short, but references are given in the summaries. And if you want to look further, you can actually check those references. But although these references, these summaries are very brief, it really explains why some people say that Singaporeans live in fear. These stories really are quite depressing, but I hope you will have the courage to read part two of the book as well. Now, I've said actually a lot. Actually, I was supposed to end in 2 minutes. So now I shall thank everybody for coming here and pass this mic to Jeanette Chong. Thank you.
Wait, so long. Come, let me give you a no more social distancing hug. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Welcome everybody. Checking in on us online. I have with me some very distinguished guests. I'm going to change up, although Solang has given a brief introduction, but I think I'd like to make a more, proper introduction. So I'm going to, first of all, introduce myself, okay? Although many people know me as a lawyer, I'm actually also a loving wife, a mother of 4 glorious children, and a grandmother of 1, and also a wannabe grandmother of more than 1. I hope my children are tuning in right now and listening carefully. I would like to change up the introductions by asking, first of all, I'm going to ask the person on my right, this gentleman in pink, to introduce the person on his right, okay? But first, let me introduce him first. So, on my right, the person in pink, he's actually a movie star, a famous Singaporean talent, and he's also the husband of my childhood friend, my childhood friend is Neo Swee Lin. I know her by a different name, but anyway, she's Neo Swee Lin. And he's actually the one half of #CoupleGoals. Okay? So all you couples out there who you should aspire to him, case you and Swee Lin. So that's my introduction of him. So over to you now. Introduce the person on your right.
Thanks, Jeanette. Thanks for the introduction. On my right is Alfian Saad, who is a poet, a playwright, an artist. I've known him for quite a few years. I think he's quite brilliant. He's regaled me with the stories of his medical school days when he was a medical student, and since then becoming an artist and a poet. And I've acted in some of his work, and I have great admiration for him as a human being, as an artist, Alfian Saad.
Thank you. Jeanette, you sabo.
You must know him, right?
But
you don't have to say anything good if you don't.
I was not prepared. I think I can get away with saying that the gentleman to my right is Dr. Chee Soon Juan, who needs no introduction. But I will say, I'm not familiar with political structures, but I will say, of course, Singapore Democratic Party but I'm not sure whether it's like chairman, secretary general, that's a blur to me. Party political structures, right? But yes, needs no introduction. This is Dr. Chee Soon Juan. Thank you.
Thanks. To my right, of course, is Kristen Han. Kristen is a writer in her own right, and I think she's written for very many international newspapers and journals. Passionate defender of liberal values, and I think to her credit has stirred up the ire of quite a few ministers and people in the establishment. So I think it's something to be proud of, and I hope she'll continue her work going forward.
Thank you.
Okay, so Kristen Han will have the honor of having the first to kick off this loose cannonballs here. Okay, I've been asked to be a moderator. I'm not going to do any moderation. I'm going to let you know, and I'm going to sort of relegate into a flower pot here. All right. So, first of all, okay, I'll just let Kristen kick off. Kristen, would you like to share with us something that you really want the audience to know about that's relating to the book?
Yeah, I think this book is like a really good collection of stories that are very well known in civil society, but probably not at all well known outside. And when you read these stories, you start to appreciate better the sort of climate that activists work in, and the sort of restrictions that we have that are really, as the book title suggests, really ridiculous. And I feel like this could be an ongoing series that will be followed by, nonsense, outrageous, ludicrous, and it could just go forever as this keeps going. So, yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I do agree with Kirsten. I would say it was an eye-opener for me, even though I'm kind of like vaguely familiar with some of the stories that are documented inside. I think as a kind of documentation, as a kind of bearing witness, right, to what it means to live in an authoritarian state. And I think there are many people who maybe are quite insulated from some of these happenings here. And I think, so there's a chronicle at the back which kind of documents a lot of these things, whether they are draconian laws, whether they are quite, I suppose, ridiculous applications of law. And it does make for quite grim reading, right? But I think it's an interesting first step to first chronicle, right? Because at some point of time, the chronicle has to lead to some kind of history writing. And what I mean by that is that, so with the chronicle, you document what happened, this and that event happened, but the history is when you start piecing it all together, and you start sort of constructing an argument about why, about this particular history of not just political repression, but also resistance. Yeah. So I actually like, for example, your essay, Kirsten, where you talk about that little vigil that you conducted, and then there was an outcome from it, right? So like the police, I think, because they had to come down, they had to deal with the fact that people wanted to find a space to grieve together, right? They actually set up some kind of like...
They set up a room for families to stay in the prison, if they wish,
Right. So I guess that's my point, that actually civil society, we have to write our own history, right? We have to say that because we pushed, because we pressured, the needle shifted. Because no one is going to write that history for us, right? So I think this book, I think, is a wonderful first step in that direction. If we don't write our own history, then we'll have people saying, oh, the government was enlightened overnight and then decided to come out with all these things themselves. It was their brainchild, but actually because they're responding to pressures from civil society. So I think we need to very shamelessly claim whatever triumphs or victories, whichever way we can.
Casey, you got something to add?
No, I agree with Edwin. It's quite an eye-opener for a lot of people who are unaware of what's going on in Singapore in terms of like the authoritarian state and how they try to mute critics. I mean, this has been going on for a long time in Singapore. To see the history of this book, I was really alarmed when I saw how long it's been going on, muting of any kind of criticism, as though this authority is perfect, and nothing is perfect. So that kind of ambition to silence any kind of criticism is very dangerous. And it's a real eye-opener. A lot of Singaporeans don't realize this. You know, I know a lot of activists, of course, who know this, but I think there's a majority who are very unaware of the situation in Singapore. Some don't wish to be aware. Some are just simply unaware. So I think this book is a brilliant start. It's an eye-opener. It will be an eye-opener for so many Singaporeans who need to wake up.
Yeah, I think also Dr. Chi has a relationship with Speaker's Corner, right? Because I think not for him. Oh, sorry.
Dr. Chi, I think you have a relationship with Speaker's Corner, I think, because I think it's covered in the book somewhere about how Speaker's Corner was actually started because of, would you like to sort of like let us know a little bit?
Yeah, it's just the documentation of some of these stories here. I think they serve a very useful function in that sense that if you were to compare the era before the advent of social media and compared to what it is now, you can then begin to see that difference in terms of civil society, political opposition, engaging the government, and that tension, that to and froing, and how the technology development of technology is really aided in making the progress as we go forward. So that, when I think it was 1999, when I just got up and I don't know what got into me, but decided to go to Raffles Square and said that I was just going to go there and speak to the public. And so I got this little microphone and speaker, portable speaker, and just placed it on Raffles Place, just announced that I was going to go there. And mind you, this was before Facebook, YouTube, and so on. So I just said I was going to go there and speak, and I was terrified at that time, not so much because my fear of the consequences, but what if nobody showed up? Right? Then you'd be standing like a fool and talking to yourself, right? But the minute I put my speakers and just onlookers were very curious, and they started crowding around. And I started talking, and then before you knew it, the police were descended upon the place. Then before I left, I told the crowd I'll be back next week, same time, same spot. Again, I wasn't sure if people were going to show up, but the second event, a huge crowd was there. And that just got me thinking at that time that Singaporeans were not so passive, and they wanted to participate and so on and so forth in the public process, wanted to hear what was going on. And one thing led to another, of course, then I ended up in court and then eventually in prison. But then, just to take off from what, was it, Alfred, you were saying that there are consequences, and the government has to deal with it. And I remember at that time, Lee Kuan Yew then went to Davos in Switzerland to attend the World Economic Forum, and then he had an interview with, what's his name already, I forget, but anyway, he was a columnist, William Safire. He's passed away since. And then Safire asked Lee Kuan Yew point blank, why don't you allow a venue for freedom of speech? And, I was floored when it was reported. Then he says, yes, why not, maybe. And that's how things got going. And then, of course, there were a few letters going back and forth. I remember in the Straits Times, first of all, they had to do the perfunctory condemnation of me being this mad person and so on and so forth. But then it says, hey, why not this whole idea? And that's how, Speaker's Corner came about. But by the time, it was still a human rights joke, because you couldn't gesticulate, you couldn't use microphone or voice enhancement instrument that they called it. And then you got to go register with the police station then nearby. And we just thought, it was just more for show, and some wit said it was more Speaker's Corner than it was Speaker's Corner. So we decided to press on and say that's still not good enough. We should be able to go there and hold protests because we are citizens of Singapore. Our constitutional rights, our political rights are all enshrined in the Constitution. So we pressed on and held some more, and said we were going to do all these activities and so on and so forth, and again got in a lot of trouble. There was one incident when the World Bank and IMF had their meeting at Suntec City, and they said we were going to start from Speaker's Corner and walk all the way, just 5 of us. Again, the police surrounded us and didn't allow us to move, and we had a standoff which lasted for almost like 3 days or something like this. But then in the end again, then to my surprise again, Goh Chok Tong then came out and said, hey look, we've got to allow these protests. Otherwise Singaporeans are just going to leave this place and what are we left with, you see? And of course I'm paraphrasing him. But then in the end they did liberalize some of the rules at Speaker's Corner, and then one thing led to another, and there we are. But what I'm trying to just get at is that we've got to do the work, and if we do the work, things will happen.
Yeah, this thing about public spaces, I think one of the chapters covered it. I think Kokila's chapter about reading against the machine. I don't know, I'm not quite sure what the title actually means. Kristen, would you be able to help me? What does that actually mean?
I don't know. Well, I guess for Kokila, there are reasons why she named that, but I mean, Rage Against the Machine is a band. Right. And okay, explained already. But well, I mean, you should rage against the machine if the machine is oppressive. Yeah.
So public spaces, I think, is kind of contested, and our freedoms, under the Constitution, and all that. I think also in the arts, right? I think there's also some issues. I think maybe Kesyu, you might want to share with us some thoughts you have regarding how people in the arts, have to.
Yeah, there's been a whole history that I've been acting professionally since 1985 in Singapore, and the level of censorship has varied according to the times, and I think the authorities have always intended to mute and to control the narrative. That's been right from the start for any kind of entertainment in Singapore. Especially live entertainment, but also television is very, very controlled, more so than theatre, I would say. But initially when I started acting, I think they would only be reactive. In other words, if people complained about a certain production, a certain aspect of production, then they would investigate and act. Further on down the line, I think they became smarter and they realized that they wanted to control the mediums more. And so we had to submit scripts for approval, and they would send back and forth. This whole process was very long, and negotiating with the people who were telling us whether we could have this or not have this, and we would try to meet and be reasonable and talk to them as fellow human beings. But it got more and more difficult because they had the power, and obviously I think they were trying to reduce the power of the entertainers. So the process was becoming clearer and clearer to us as we get along, that it was all about control only, and there was very little negotiation that was possible. So, and then things became worse, I think, then that we no longer had to submit scripts. And so they could catch us on things, and they became more and more punitive. So the direction was very obvious for anybody who was in arts or entertainment, that it was a shutting down process, a process of power. I think the agenda was power more than anything else.
But maybe, the powers that be, right, they are thinking that they want to do good, and then they have this sort of good intentions, I would say. But
well,
perhaps,
I suppose to me, a good intention is if you promise to serve the people, you don't turn around and then rule them. So I wonder whether what you say is true or not, whether there were any good intentions at all. To me, a good intention, you swear to serve, means you serve the people. You don't try to control them.
So I was having this brief conversation with Alfian, sometimes the powers that be, they do things, but then on the receiving end, it's felt differently. I think maybe you might want to comment on that.
Yeah. So, if you can clarify, what do you
Yeah.
mean by good
No.
intentions, for example,
I don't,
right?
I'm not the power that be, but I'm trying to be
Like,
take
yeah.
the side of,
Sure.
yeah, and maybe they think that they're doing a good thing. So, but I think that what is interesting is because people on the receiving end
Yeah.
of your actions, may have a different view,
Yeah.
right?
So maybe if we talk about censorship, for example, right? So the rhetorical justification for it is you're trying to protect the community from, let's say, certain ideas or certain images or whatever, right? So I think I'm not, in general, an absolutist, a free speech absolutist. I think there are certain forms of speech like hate speech, right? So especially when it comes to age-appropriate stuff, you want to protect them, sure, from graphic violence and graphic sexual depictions. I agree with those things. I think in Singapore, though, there is an overextension of that of the work of the censors. So rather than just sort of protecting minors, for example, from sex or violence, they're also trying to protect minors from, say, political content, right? So I think that's an example executive overreach in Singapore. So that's of course a very deep problem, right? So I'm okay when you say, okay, young people shouldn't be exposed to all this, as I mentioned, sex violence, but if you say they shouldn't be exposed to certain ideas about decolonization or opposition politics or whatever, then I think that's really very problematic, because the argument that they usually have is that young people are not mature enough to process these ideas. But my contention is that you'll never be mature until you encounter these ideas in the first place. So that process of maturing, right? You will never mature if you're shielded from these ideas your whole life. Yeah. So I think that's something, for example, that I think the censors don't quite get.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. Anyone want to comment on follow up with what he said?
I guess on this whole idea that, maybe they have good intentions, I feel like that's a very common sort of thread even among civil society, that sometimes we start to feel like, okay, maybe I don't want to be too unreasonable. That police officer is also just doing his job. And then you start making excuses for there's no point being angry at this police officer. He's just doing his job. He's not high ranking enough. He's not the real power. He's not the real decision maker. And actually it was very nice to me in interrogation. And then you start to forget that, actually wait, I am in interrogation. I don't need to be sorry for you when you are interrogating me. And so I feel like we do that a lot. We end up excusing and making excuses. Or like for every case in this book, right, they will come up with some sort of plausible reason to say, it's not oppression, it's just because it's the law, because otherwise there might be a riot or there might be disturbance, we're protecting public safety. And it creates this gaslighting effect of, like, we are not oppressing you, we are just, keeping the peace, being like, and then you end up having to, like, not only do you not get solidarity from other Singaporeans, you have to even convince people that you're being oppressed in the first place. And sometimes I find that even more tiring than interrogation. Like, interrogation is very clear. I mean, a police interrogation room, this is not fair. But then to have to leave the interrogation room and convince people that it was not fair, and then everyone will be like, but why you go and stand there? Why do you go and do this? Why do you provoke them? And then I find that way more tiring. So sometimes I'm just like, I don't care what your intentions are, this is not fair.
Yeah.
I see what you mean, yeah. I guess, Casey, you have any thoughts about this?
Not at the moment. I agree with what Kristen is saying, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. I guess,
Sorry, I also just want to add that I think it's just a kind of self-deception, right, by a lot of these functionaries, I feel. Of course, they wouldn't want to think of themselves as apparatchiks of authoritarian state. They will not. That's not the kind of self-image that they wanted to have. So I think there's all these sort of rationalizations that by going after these dissidents, so to speak, they are sort of protecting the larger community, protecting a larger whole. But I think there's quite a bit of self-delusion there, because your psyche is threatened, right, by that, to think that you're the bad person.
So is it a misunderstanding? You know, like you're perceiving a hostility when there's none.
So I think there's definitely a lot of state paranoia. I've been in the arts long enough to know that there's so much overestimation of what artists are capable of, and so much underestimation of what the audience is capable of, right? So this idea that, we really have to control and regulate because ideas are dangerous, and artists for some reason can influence large crowds and therefore somehow incite the audience to overthrow government and all that. I think it's just so much paranoia, and I don't know how to sort of have that conversation and say, hey, look at me. Do you really think that my agenda is to like inflame the masses and sort of incite violence or riot? So yeah. So I don't know how to do that.
The more they get used to not being challenged, the more a tiny challenge feels like a huge challenge, right? So I think that's where the paranoia comes in. So sometimes it's like, how did you and your other fellow activists organize this? And I was like, you think we organize? It's actually like, you have no idea like how often things are just gonna come spontaneously, and it's like, whoever is free, please do something, right? And then they've got this huge like conspiracy idea of like, you organize, and then like you provoke this person, and it's just like, no lah, we don't have that capacity, to be honest. Like, we wish we did, but we don't have the capacity to actually function as an established, like, organized unit, right? Like, that's not how Singapore civil society works.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like overreaction, perhaps, to a threat that's non-existent. Is that probably? It's just,
I think so.
Yeah?
I think if you sell a siege mentality long enough, you buy your own siege mentality.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think definitely like the media is kind of complicit in that, right? Because by not being truthful with their reporting sometimes, by shielding the political elites from certain kind of uncomfortable truths, then I think some of these small actions are magnified and seen as such severe acts of dissidence.
Right. Yeah. So these are certain, maybe there's a lack of dialogue between certain groups of people.
Yeah, but how do we get invited to the table in the first place, right? Because I don't think we can have proper dialogue if there's already this kind of presumption that, this person is going to be adversarial or confrontational, and therefore I don't want to see this person. I sort of like decide who gets invited to that table, right?
Yeah, I've tried dialogue, it didn't end well for me.
Right, yeah. I won't give up on dialoguing, right? But I think one of the preconditions for dialogue is that you are able to deal with someone with very, very different opinions, right? And not like from the beginning, what common ground do we have? If you don't have, I don't want to see you at all, right? Yeah.
Dr. Chi, you have some thoughts to share with us?
Let's get down to the basics and try to understand human psychology, right? You get a group of people coming together, give them a free hand in devising the society that they want, or they think that is good in their own image and their own thinking. They will inevitably devolve into a situation where they will write rules and regulations to protect their own interests, right? And to be able to propagate their own power. That's just human nature, right? So that if you didn't have an opposing group of persons, and if you proscribed them, you prohibited them from organizing themselves, very soon you get a situation whereby there's just a group of people who hegemony and just wanting to have that protect their own interests and power base, you see. So that's very clear, right? And we always forget that PAP came on the back of harnessing the people's ability to protest against the British. So that if they didn't, we'd still be singing today, God Save the Queen, and not Majulah Singapura. Let's not forget that. So it's important to remember that because we're human beings, all right, that there's this innate need for us to come together to communicate with each other, to organize ourselves, so that the powers that be, or on the other side of this aisle, make sure that your ability to be able to organize yourselves, to communicate with each other, is as,
Curtailed.
yeah, as curtailed as possible. You see, so that's, as I said, there's always this tension. And so in a healthy, robust society where people are in the process, in the thick of, running their own society and making sure there's dynamism and there's just this healthy debate going on. I think to that degree that there is this ability, I think it doesn't exist in Singapore, and that is where I think that danger lies for us going forward as a society, as a country.
Well, I have a question from our online audience for KSU. What are your thoughts about shutting down the substation, and any thoughts about its continuation?
Yeah, I was very sad about the substation being closed down. It was a decision that was made by the authorities. Substation had served Singapore very well, actually, as a really hotbed of discussion, of inviting all different points of view, actually, not just presenting one, not just the liberal point of view, but an open discussion between people through artistic endeavor, or discussion itself, Sometimes after the pieces of theatre that were held, discussions were open and people could talk freely among each other. And it was a wonderful space, actually. I think it was created by Koh Pao Kun, and it was precisely for that. That intention was to open up discussion, so we discussed things in Singapore. Yeah, there was an artistic bent to it, but it was very sad when that happened. There were so many of the artists who had been involved in the history of the substation and what the good that it was doing, connecting Singaporeans through ideas and welcoming all the ideas, all the diversity of ideas. And yet, the final result is the closing down. And to be honest, I was sad, but I wasn't surprised, because that's the direction I have seen from the Singapore authorities since I was young. I come from a family where my father used to really look up to the PAP figures, especially Lee Kuan Yew, and later in his life he said he's become arrogant, he's become a tyrant. My father died really very heavily critical of not only Lee Kuan Yew, but of the PAP authority, when they were serving themselves more than the people. Is the thing that I said before. So
that's your father's view.
Yeah. So I had a quandary, because when my father died, I was already influenced by my father, and I thought I was getting very emotional about it. So I would try to be the devil's advocate for myself and say, maybe it's not all so bad. Maybe Dad is wrong about a few things, and I don't want to be just loyal to Dad in my thinking. And I think he's been proved right to me as time has gone on beyond his death.
I think, Alfian, you got some thoughts about, follow up to
The
him.
substation.
Sorry, you would like to?
Sorry, I need to clarify something which KSU said about the substation.
Oh, okay. We'll bring the mic round to you, but
Yeah.
let me just hear from Alfian first. Alfian, would you like to, then I will, you want to share your thoughts?
No, I think definitely there was a collective mourning from the arts community about the closing of the substation, because it was such a special place where the arts and activism could coexist, and civil society could coexist, right? So some of my most magical moments at the substation was, for example, we had a peace concert when the US invaded Iraq, for example, and I think that was the only space in the whole of Singapore where people could actually gather and express their objections, right, towards this unilateral invasion. And I wonder, today we've had Russia invading Ukraine, and I really do feel that sense of loss, a sense of where is the gathering place for people to come together and see, other people and express some form of solidarity. And I think we need that so much as human beings, right? To comfort one another, and to know that in our griefs there are other fellow human beings who feel the same way. So yeah, it was a wonderful, magical space for me. A lot of its artistic directors were also public intellectuals, people like Gopal Kun, Disa Sitaran, Lee Weng Choi. Yeah, and I think in the past few years, there have been lots of these spaces. So Substation is one of them, Yale and US, right? So it's been quite difficult, I think, for quite a lot of people. Yeah.
I think you would like to ask a question, yes?
No, okay. Sorry, I just need to respond to something which KCU said as a factual error.
Sure.
So I'm Casey Chew. I was the chairman of the substation for 20 years. KCU, you just mentioned that the government shut it down. So that's not correct. The board made the decision to close the substation.
I see.
However, it is partially correct, because why did the board make the decision to close the substation? You see, what happened was the substation occupied this location, this site, this place at 45 Armenian Street. And the NEC told us we have to vacate the building because there was some major renovation that's going to take place, which we were very agreeable to vacating the building, presuming that when the renovation was over, it's going to take 2 years, we will of course go back and occupy the space. That building has only been the substation. That building was there, I mean, the building was a substation, that's why it was called the substation, electrical substation. The substation was there before the NEC was founded. It was founded, substation was there in 1919, the NEC, the National Arts Council, was founded in 1991. But what was the thing that took us by surprise was to later find out that the NEC did not intend for us to go back to the substation as it was. After we voiced our total astonishment, like, what do you mean we're not going back? And so then they said, oh, you want to go back? Oh, all right, you want to go back, you can, but there'll be other tenants. You'll no longer be the sole tenant. So not to get into those details, but for many, many reasons, and after very serious consideration, the board decided that we would close the substation down. At the same time, this was when the necessary stage lost its location in Marine Parade. This was when the Intercultural Theatre Institute, ITI, was also told that its location would be up in question. The reaction of the arts committee was so intense and immense and palpable that they said, do not close down the substation. So because of that, the board responded and said, okay, let us have proposals on how the substation could continue. So I just need to quickly update that the substation decided not to close down after all. However, it is in a kind of a fallow period. The old board stepped down, a new board came on, and that new board is now developing the new substation, but it's in transition, and it's very, very quiet right now. So I just want to clarify technically.
Thank you.
Substation lives on. We do not know what form it will take because it doesn't have a place right now. But that's the situation in the substation.
Thank you very much for the clarification. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Okay, I have another question, and this time is for Dr. Chi from our online audience. Okay, here it goes. How do you manage to smile and remain calm after suffering from severe political harassment?
You know, as bleak as things are, I continue to remain hopeful, and I'll tell you why. I've been fortunate enough to be able to straddle the two eras, so to speak. The one before social media and the one that came after that. And if you are able to compare these two, you'll see that there's a huge difference. Whilst we were at the mercy of SPH, Media Corp, at that time was, I think, it started RTS and then SBC and then TCS, that kind of thing. Unlike then, today you're able to reach out directly to the public. And as difficult as things are with them coming up with new laws like POFMA and then more recently FICA, you nevertheless have that avenue to press forward and to make sure that if you get your hands on the right levers of messaging and getting people to be involved, especially the younger generation, things can develop and develop very quickly. And if you look at history, the change never comes in that linear fashion, you're right? Nothing happens for years, for decades, right? But when change comes, it comes very suddenly, it comes very abruptly. And that is where I think that the purposes of books like that, when you document things and you have streams like this, where it may seem to fall on just deaf ears and people don't really seem to be responding to it. But there's something going on because society is continuing to react to it, absorbing the material, and then you begin to put all these things, these ridiculous cases out. I'm very sure that Singaporeans are very aware, at least can be made aware, of the ridiculousness of some of these cases here. And then they begin to question and say, why? Why can't we have just a little more freedom in a society to be able to do what we feel is right, rather than leave out to the select few who think that they know best for Singapore, but don't really do.
Thank you, Dr. Chi. Okay, I have another question from our online audience. It's also an arts-related question, so I guess either of you can take it on. Looking back at the art scene from the 1980s to the present, do you think the scene has regressed or progressed?
Okay, I think there are a lot of ironies in this situation. Coming from a theatre background, theatre was, I think, really got a shot in the arm when the NAC decided to sponsor a lot of theatre companies. And I think the theatre companies were very aware of what was going on, very pleased to be able to receive more funds so we can do more. But at the same time, we were aware that there was an agenda of control with this funding. So it was a very double-edged kind of thing. But in my opinion, I think theatre in Singapore, the numbers of audience since I started anyway, have gone exponential. Like we used to get maybe, 3,000 people watching us total for a whole run of a theatre project, And now it's way above that. It's in tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, depending on the venue. And a lot of that is due to the fact that we got the funding. We were more ambitious with productions in terms of production values and things like that. But it was also due to the fact that the theatre practitioners were able to negotiate with the authorities about the content. The theatre practitioners became wiser, became more experienced, became more aware of how the authorities were practicing their control agenda. And so managed to talk to some individuals, sometimes to get through to some individuals within the authorities to get things changed slightly, So on the one hand, there was progress. On the other hand, the agenda, I have no doubt the agenda was also for control. And it still continues now. But it's ironic that the theatre audiences have grown, the theatre production values have grown, and indeed what is addressed, the content, has indeed grown despite the attempt to control and to inhibit.
Okay. Thoughts from you? Regress or
It's a
progress?
very difficult question
Yeah.
because, like, how will you define progress, right? So if it's just purely in terms of quantity, of course, you know, there's so many more plays these days, and any weekend you'd be spot for choice before COVID. That said, I think when it comes to liberalization, I think it's selective liberalization. So in many countries, in many authoritarian countries, you will see that the first things that get liberalized will be things like sexuality, for example, right? So in the 80s, it would be impossible to stage a queer play. But I think recently, you know, you're able to, although they will still slap an R18 rating on those, right? So I think what's the frontiers, the next frontiers when it comes to challenging censorship would be over certain things like race, religion, as well as politics. Politics, I think, is really the final frontier. So I will say yes, liberalization, but maybe in certain departments and certain aspects rather than others. Yeah.
Okay, this is another question also, and I think it's probably for either Kirsten or Dr. Chi, but let's go with Kirsten. What are your ideas for developing a new generation of activists? And so what are your ideas for developing a new generation of activists?
I don't think I need to have ideas. I think they're developing themselves perfectly fine, right? And they know better than me most of the time how they want to do what they want to do, and you know what best strategies to employ to talk to the communities that they want to talk to and to support. So I think there's no need for any of us to really sit around and think. It's a very Singapore institutional, like, how do we develop youth or women or the arts or whatever, and then we must have committee, then we sit and talk, then we task force everything. And then, like, I think, why don't we just let people figure it out themselves, right? I think that's a good way to get good ideas.
I mean, I also thought that your article was very moving, you know, because I think that activism also starts from a place of compassion or caring, you know, for things that are happening and not being oblivious or, you know, don't care and just do your own thing, you know. So I think that, you know, being interested in something, it's about life, isn't it? Being interested in life and what's going on, right? Anyway, so another question also is that, or maybe Dr. Chi can help me with this one. This looks a bit of a, what is the, I didn't compose this question, right? What is the kind of response and restraint to political control we want to see from a civil society perspective? ISA, POFMA, and FICA have caused civil society to be in a permanent seizure state. So I think it means to say that, I mean, let's read. What is the kind of response and restraint to political control we want to see from a civil society perspective? ISA, POFMA, and FICA have caused civil society to be in a permanent seizure state.
You know, this relates to what Kristen said a minute ago, and that is how does civil society kind of develop? We may not be there to want to say, hey, let's organize this committee and this association or that grouping, but there needs to be leaders who are willing to go out and organize themselves and then be able to, for example, even say some of these campaigns, death penalty campaigns and so on and so forth, they do serve a function in terms of then you then allow the younger folks, the generations, to really see what this is all about, and there's an educational process in that as well. And that is also, that education process must also begin to speak to the public sphere, and there's inculcations through the decades that somehow or other, if there is no ISA, there's no POFMA, this, then that, society will just degenerate, isn't it, into chaos and then, right? There is a segment of Singaporeans there who just through the years have just been brainwashed into, conditioned into thinking that way. I think that must be addressed as well. In that sense that going forward, this whole suppression of our rights has the effect of turning us into a very malformed society, malformed country, in the sense that we're very well developed financial systems, right? Our economic system, but then on the socio-political side, it's very lacking, and this is where I think that society, if it's not rounded, going forward, you've got huge ramifications in that, when younger people don't find that kind of freedom and that ability to express themselves, they leave for greener pastures, for other countries that have that kind of, And then here we are having this hollowing out, and then, then the government makes this case that because, there's a brain drain, that you need foreign talent coming in. And so you've got this situation where I think sometimes you just cannot bifurcate the economics from, the political side of things. They have two sides of the same coin. And if you don't develop them in tandem, we're going to be in trouble, as I think we already are. You see with some of these situations where this is huge, very debate going on about foreign talent, and are we just over-leveraged in terms of having foreigners? And I think the government has admitted that as well, isn't it?
All right. Okay, I have another one here. I don't know whether it's related, but let's see. With tightening authoritarian control, are we having authoritarian control?
Yes.
I thought we okay, no, and we now have even more repressive laws, as a tongue twister, than those explored in the book. What will it take to claim back our freedom? So I think the concern is that, are we losing even more freedoms? Are we? And what can we do?
I think related to the previous question.
Sorry, I didn't speak in the mic, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. With tightening authoritarian control, and now we have even more repressive laws than those explored in the book, what will it take to claim our freedom back?
I think related to the previous question, right? So the question was about what restraints on power from civil society's perspective. And I think the reality is that there's a lot of restraint on civil society and not a lot of restraint on power. That's the current situation in Singapore, right? And we create this situation where we are all very accountable to the ruling party, but the ruling party does not display the same level of accountability to us. And I think there's real, psychological, mental, emotional, spiritual harm to the feeling as an activist that your margin of error is zero, because anytime you get something a little bit wrong, even if it was in good faith but you just made a mistake, they're going to come for you. So you can't do anything that's wrong, because any little thing that's wrong will be blown up. It will be in the Straits Times, there will be ministers making statements or parliamentary speeches, and then it will follow you around forever, and you'll be forever explaining yourself. I think that really kind of actually puts a lot of people off, because it makes you feel like if I can't do it perfectly, then I can't do it at all, because I'm going to be so exposed. And I think that damages our society in the long run, right? When people feel like they aren't even allowed to make mistakes or learn, learn in public view, right? People learn in public view. And so I think to deal with that, we have to recognize that this is an unfair situation, and we don't have to be beholden to this situation, and that we should stick, all the more we should stick by each other. So even when people make mistakes, we stick, and we don't turn around and victim blame and be like, oh, why did you phrase it this way? Why did you say that? Then you see they come for you, you should have known they were going to come for you. I think if we had that solidarity, it would go a long way in changing things, right? Because civil society, we first have to stand with each other before we can get other Singaporeans to stand with us.
Interesting. All right, thank you. That's very, very thought-provoking. Okay, is there a certain caution when it comes to civil society and opposition parties' cooperation? Aren't opposition parties not part of civil society? What stops us from building stronger ties across these lines?
No.
I think that there isn't any lines. I mean, I think we're all like, in it together, right?
I mean, I can only speak for the SDP, and that is not for want of trying. I mean, in that sense, that since I've been involved in politics, I've always advocated and at least, try to reach out in the sense that if we are in that position where we are not fully fledged democracy, and in that sense that as we're climbing the ladder towards achieving democratic freedoms and so on, you've almost got to link arms together with civil society. Again, if you read history, no society, no nation has come about, making that transition from authoritarian control to democratic systems without the political opposition and civil society coming together and making sure that, look, you take a pick, right? Taiwan, Korea, Indonesia, South Africa, and so on, Central Europe, all these countries have had to, come together, collaborate, and make sure that that whole idea of the ruling party then becoming at least accountable to the people, achieving that, and then then that separation then becomes very natural in terms of political parties, ruling or opposition, and civil society.
Yeah.
Alfian, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So I can speak from my perspective as someone from the arts community, where I think there's always been these discussions about, we cannot associate so openly with political parties, and I think that it's a kind of discursive trap, right? Which I think is part of this whole thing called pragmatic resistance, which is that it's okay to be political, but the limit is you cannot be party political.
Right.
Yeah, so I think this kind of thinking, unfortunately, is very pervasive in Singapore, where, so the idea that being party political somehow or the other compromises your neutrality, compromises your political objectivity, but it's really stupid, because we will, a lot of arts companies will have no qualms about, say, inviting members of parliament from the ruling party to come and watch their plays and to take photos with them. So obviously that's already a form of partisanship. So I think we just really need to sort of unpack all these kind of rhetorical traps. Why is it that with opposition party then you're partisan, but with ruling party then you're not? No one's going to make a comment about that, right? And actually, we should also examine whether the relationship with the ruling party is a form of clientism, a kind of political patronage, which is kind of like feudal, isn't it? The whole guest of honor thing, and I must have this optics of like rubbing shoulders with MPs, because I hope that would somehow mean that I'm in their good books, right? So I think we need to be careful about these things. If you are going to be purely objective, then either you don't associate with any politician at all, or you take pictures with all politicians, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and whilst this kind of thinking is also very pervasive amongst opposition circles, civil society, on the other side of the coin, you have the PAP not having any qualms in saying, hey, NTUC, PAP, abang adik kind of situation.
PA.
And you look PA, they have no problems with that. And then they will put their former ministers on boards, chairman of SPH, MediaCorp, and down the road. So, let's be clear. And that's why I say, here we are just talking about niceties, and we have to be very proper and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, everything is very murky. Everything is very muddled and not murky. So it's just important for us to get that thinking straight and clear.
I think it was mentioned in one of the chapters of Raffles Renounce, which Alfian co-edited, right, that we always say Singapore is very apolitical, but actually the reality is we are incredibly politicized. as a country, but only one party's politics is privileged.
Right.
So it's not that we are not politicized, it's that everything is politicized to PAP narrative. And then if you disagree with it, then you're called political, but somehow PAP narrative is neutral, is allowed, right? I think. And we also have this tendency, I think because we are not used to the complexity of civil society and democratic messiness, we also have a tendency of generalizing. So like, and that creates to this wariness of like associating with opposition party, because then there's this tendency of if you associate even once, then people will like bind you together forever, and then you become answerable to each other's things forever somehow. Then like, you know, if so like I remember I think I appeared at like an SDP panel once, and then for years after that I was like SDP member Kristen Han, and then every time someone from the SDP says something that like people don't agree with, then they'll be like, what do you say about it? I was like, why do I have to be answerable to a party that I'm not even a member of? And like it's possible for us to do things together and then disagree about other things and then come together and do other things again, and it doesn't make us immediately like one monolith. So that's why I think sometimes opposition parties and civil society are wary of coming together, because we are afraid of, or then forever we'll be bound together and be made to like, so if I go and protest, then the party doesn't want to like associate, because later we say what we will become answerable to if these activists go and protest and get arrested. Then suddenly it'll be like, oh, why is your party condoning this? And then you know, and I think that's as Alfian said, a trap that we should get out of, right? Like that's the sort of narrative they will spin, but we don't need to like bend over backwards to like hide from this kind of thing.
That's really well put.
Yeah, okay, I've got a couple of more questions from the audience, and then, you know, I'm conscious that we have only like maybe 5 or 10 minutes more. Okay, are there any recent examples or, the questioner says local resistance that has moved you in recent times, whether from the book or otherwise? So I guess it's like, are there anything that's happening right now, you know, or recently that would be something that, you know, would be good thing, a good you know, move. Is there anything?
The small signs of care and solidarity are also very important. So when we were campaigning for Nagin, we also, there was this solidarity letter from the loved ones of other prisoners on death row in solidarity with Nagin, and we collected a lot of signatures. It was the most number of loved ones stepping up to sign a solidarity letter. So previously, when I was doing like anti-death penalty cases, it was, people were kind of atomized and they took care of their own family member, but there wasn't a lot of interaction. But to see that there has been a growing sort of connection and interaction, and then today when Kaha was executed, family members of other prisoners on death row were like trying to follow up, find out what it is, and said, oh, we'll go to the cemetery so we can be with the family. Maybe they need people to bring food during Ramadan when they want to break fast and stuff. So so this is not visible in a public scale, right? It's actually very small. It's like, you know, one WhatsApp group where people are like, are you okay? But I think that's very valuable already, that there are people coming together, because a lot of what we have makes us very atomized and like in our own silos. And I think the more we have more,
the solidarity is quite deep.
Solidarity is very important.
Well, I mean, in the interest of time, I'm going to ask maybe KSU and each one of you, maybe tell us something that you know made you like. I mean, something about that you read in the book that gave you a lot of food for thought. You know, that something that you'd like to share with us.
I was very moved by Kirsten's story about the vigil, and interested to find that these vigils have happened before, and nothing was done about it. It's just in this instance they decided to do something about it. So the inconsistency didn't surprise me, but I was still enlightened by that. You know, so the article, I found the article very moving. It made me want to do something. There's also, I was very encouraged by the young people, although they were shut down, who were complaining about the schools. You know, when it came to the transgender issue. And these kids were so brave, and they were so conscious, and they were so active. about what they did. I was very proud of them, and I don't think they were frightened at all by the shutting down and closing down of their protest. I think a lot of their friends, a lot of other young people got involved in the whole discussion. I was very, very pleased to see that. Sully and I do some streaming, so we meet a lot of young people who have become very aware of this. Young Singaporeans very aware of the situation in Singapore, much more than my generation, who were pretty politically apathetic, and it really encouraged me that the book pointed out what these students were saying about how they wanted the education system to change, to become more open, to be more discussive. It's really a good book. It was grim in parts, I think, but grim in a way that moves you to want to do something. It's enlightening. It's a pleasure to be enlightened, even though it's grim, I think. So I love the book. I read it a couple of times. I got very emotional, so I had to read it again with a calmer mind.
That's really nice. Thanks. Alfian, something you want to share about the book?
Yeah, so I think reading the books, I think some people have an impression that resistance is an act of rebellion, is an act of anger. But reading the book, I realize often that resistance is an act of love, and there are ways in which it can be enacted with humor, with joy. So one of the essays that I love is by Kokila Anamalai. There's another one also by Silan Pale, and I highly recommend it because, for this work that he did, 32 years, Interrogation of a Mirror, where as part of that public intervention, he stood in front of the Parliament building, right? So there wasn't really an artist statement, so I think this book is one of those rare instances when he actually talks about this work. Yeah. So he recounts an incident. He's one of the policemen who approached him asked him, "Oh, you don't know Chia Tai Po? Why are you doing this for him?" Right? And then there was a passerby, and there was a little girl or something. She had tripped, and the policeman went over and tried to help her. And Seelan actually said to the policeman, "Oh, you don't know that girl either. Why would you do this for her?" Right? And I thought that said everything about what it means to care for another person who's not in your immediate circle, right? So that idea of thinking about a larger humanity, that kind of fellow feeling, that kind of comradeship we would feel for another human being, to commemorate the person's imprisonment for 32 years, to feel that suffering, to want to walk in his shoes. So I think this book, I threw the pitch, right? Yeah, please read it, because I think it will hopefully revise some stereotypes you might have about what is resistance, what is activism, what is protest, and to know that it can be a very human and life-affirming and joyous thing, actually, to stand for what you believe in.
Thank you very much. Dr. Chi, some last words about
in a similar vein, I just want to highly recommend this book. There are a lot of gems, stories that I think people should can relate to and should be knowledgeable about. But rather than just cite certain chapters, overall I think it's important that these 2 years of the COVID pandemic has brought to light the importance of people being able to come together, right? When we remain isolated, when we remain insulated, it affects society's psychological, mental health, right? And that is what humanity is all about, isn't it? At the very essence of it, that's what activism is all about. People coming together, being able to talk about some of the things that we care about. And what we care about cannot just be Will Smith slapping the other guy, Chris Rock, right? It has to be about things that we care about, that affects us daily. And guess what? Things that we care about and things that affect us daily all comes under the broad rubric of politics, isn't it? Policies. So that when you begin to deny people the ability to come together to talk about politics and policies, that's where I think society begins to go downhill and cannot be the kind of robust, healthy society that we all want to see Singapore become.
Okay. Kirsten, last words, something that you want to talk about.
I think even though part 2 of the book makes for very grim reading, I really appreciate that sort of laying it out, because I think when I started in civil society, it was very commonly said that Singaporeans are just like that. We don't protest, we don't like politics, we don't push back. It's just not Singaporean, in the Singaporean DNA to do this. And I think when you see the timeline laid out, it's a very strong pushback against that narrative, right? It's not that we were born like this, not to resist. We were made like this, and it was taken away from us. And I feel like every time we assert that it was taken away from us, it's also a way to assert that we need to take it back, and not just accept, right, that, oh, we were born like this, then we'll just be helpless forever because this is just how we are as a people. So I think I really appreciate, like, that the title is ridiculous, right? Because if it was a book published by like the SPH one, it will be called Lawbreakers. You know, like, you know, the fact that we can assert that this is ridiculous, you can't do this to us, you can't do this to people, is an act of defiance that I really think is very powerful, right? Rather than say, this is a book of stories of people who broke the law and then we are very sorry, then we reflect, then we won't do it again. But to say, no, it is just ridiculous, you can't do this to Singaporeans, I think that's very powerful already.
Well, thank you very much. Well, before I close, I just want to tell my friends out there in the audience and, people who are tuning in that if you buy the book by today, order in, you will get a book that is autographed by all of us here, 5 of us here. So it's going to be a very special edition if you place your order in before midnight tonight. Okay, so anyway, without further ado, I want to say thank you very much to Kirsten, Dr. Chi, Alfian, and KSU for speaking from their heart and being so candid and frank and sharing their thoughts with us, all of us here tonight. All right, so thank you very much, everybody. Okay, bye-bye.